Join us and our friends as we fall down the rabbit hole of security wonder. If you're ready to see how deep it goes, you've found the right place. Pour your tea. You're not late for office hours. And now, our Red Queen, Tarah Wheeler.
Hello, everyone. It's so lovely to have you back with us again this week. I'm Tarah Wheeler, CEO of Red Queen Dynamics. It is a joy and a pleasure, as always, to be part of this community, serving managed service providers and the small businesses they love. Folks, it's also a joy this week to be joined by a dear friend, colleague, and one of the people I think I respect most in my entire life. Her name is Savanah Sly. Savanah is the founder and co-director of New Moon Network, an intermediary fund and capacity builder advancing the rights and welfare of people in the sex trade. Speaking from lived and studied experience, Sly articulates the impacts of criminalization, surveillance, discrimination, and stigma on sex workers, and uplifts holistic solutions to mitigate sex trade exploitation. Sly currently serves on the Global Steering Committee of the Sex Work Donor Collaborative and also on the board of the Woodhull Freedom Foundation, the only organization in the United States dedicated to defending sexual freedom as a fundamental human right. Sly has played a powerful convening role as a coalition organizer for the ACLU of Washington, the Tech Equity Coalition, and numerous local and national sex worker rights initiatives. Sly's commentary is published in Brookings, Teen Vogue, and Psychology Today. Learn more about her work at newmoonnetwork.org. Savanah, it is absolutely wonderful having you aboard with us today and having a great conversation. What the hell are you doing here in a conversation about cybersecurity and small businesses? I love this. Tell us more.
Security, small business and entrepreneurialism, and the rights and safety of people in the sex trade all go hand in hand. So I'm really excited to be here today talking with you about it all.
I am absolutely thrilled to have you here too. And I think maybe the most important lesson that we can gain from watching how regulations in this country impact marginalized populations is the very important lesson that what happens to the most vulnerable among us is shortly to come for the next most vulnerable among us. We're going to tie this pretty quickly into some recent SEC regulations. And I mean very specifically the ones that have had a bunch of companies very concerned about breach disclosure, including the mandatory 96-hour breach disclosure regulation that the SEC put out for publicly traded companies. Turns out that blackmail has been a key element in a bunch of data breaches recently, including one that was targeted towards Viking Therapeutics. So I guess the question is, does this sound a little familiar when it comes to vulnerable populations and regulations that unfairly target them instead of the people doing the victimizing?
Yes, I mean, just a little background on my work. I'm an advocate for the rights and safety of people in the sex trade. So at my organization, New Moon Network, we work with organizations led by people who identify as sex workers, as well as survivors of exploitation in the sex trade. And what we found in our work and in our own experiences is that people in the sex trade, and sex workers in particular, really are canaries in the coal mine when it comes to bad policies that might seem like a good idea at first, but they are essentially just slippery slopes for creeping human rights violations that will eventually affect most, if not all of us. So especially in the technology and privacy area, we can see many examples of this, and where sex workers and their allies have been trying to raise the alarm and then also advance stronger policies that make more sense.
That is absolutely key. And I think that there's often a sense that small business in this country has been left behind by enterprise level solutions that often target the needs of what you would call not only larger businesses, but maybe the more accepted, standardized forms of business. I feel like there's a real overlap between the entrepreneurial world and sex work, especially given the massive explosion of the internet, the changing mores around privacy, how we guard privacy. And I guess, to anybody who's still kind of looking for a reason that you and I are having this conversation, I've talked to you before, and it's kind of funny. I'm speaking to this incredibly famous and brilliant sex workers' rights advocate, pro-dom, and an amazing person, and we're still sitting here talking about like city zoning regulations. Like, how do you file for this for your business? All these problems are the same everywhere, and I think most people would definitely draw some connections between hacking and sex work. I think a lot of the time it's preparation. 1% of the time it's interesting. And the rest of the time it's a bunch of boring prep work.
Yeah, it's interesting. So when we talk about business and then we talk about vulnerable communities, sex workers are business people. The reason that people engage in the adult industry is to make money. That is why they are there. And these people who are putting themselves into business, usually as independent contractors working for themselves, are largely women or LGBTQ people. And there's a lot of people of color in this industry. There's a lot of people living with disabilities who find that the adult industry is the best way to make ends meet for them, given their capacities. So these are business people, and a lot of them are legal, legitimate business people. When we're talking about the formal adult industry sector, or even stripping, so it's like we have porn and stripping. That's all legal, and yet these business people face really unfair policies due to the stigma around their work that really compromise their privacy. And when your privacy is compromised, your safety is compromised, especially if you're stigmatized due to your profession. And that all compromises your bottom line. So I think that sex workers have a lot to teach the business world, especially small and medium-sized businesses. And what happens to sex workers really should be relevant to other business people.
I love that line right there. If your privacy is compromised, your safety is compromised, and your bottom line is compromised. That's true across so many industries, so many lines of work. When I think about sensitive information in small businesses, I think about accounting firms. I think about law firms. Law firms and accounting firms are deeply sensitive to reputational issues. We count several legal and accounting firms among the clients of our clients. They're the small businesses that have, external IT support from their managed service provider. And there's a unique desire for reputational guards against harm. And I'm here to tell you, if a law firm or an accounting firm has a data breach that exposes all the financial and legal business that is supposed to be confidential of all of their clients, that business is done.
Oh, yeah.
It's just flat done. And I feel like there's so many parallels here. Have you seen anything similar in your line of work?
Every day, all the time. Everything from non-technological interactions where it's like, when you're talking about something as stigmatized as consensual adult sex work, everything from where you park in the neighborhood and what door you're seen going in, like that's a surveillance issue and that's a privacy issue, all the way up to are your email messages compromised when you're communicating with a sex worker? Or are you being forced to now upload your government issued ID in order to access adult materials online? And that's actually happening in a lot of states right now. Those are all privacy issues. They have to do with business, and they also have to do with our individual ability to connect with other people and access First Amendment protected materials, frankly.
I strongly agree. When I think about this, I don't just think about people having to upload government issued ID. I think about children in multiple states having to cope with this issue. I think the most recent thing I saw was a great op-ed this morning about the recent law attempting to be passed or possibly has passed one chamber in Ohio requiring age verification with government ID. And here's the challenge on that one. I, as a security professional, believe that this is going to do absolutely nothing to prevent children from accessing adult materials on the internet. What it's going to do is set up an absolute playbook for predators looking to groom children online, who are going to do the same thing that every single person listening to this call did, which is get online no matter what the TOS is. I was there. Come on. This sets up a blackmail path that is so similar to what happened to that Viking Therapeutics executive. That it's just mind-blowing to me that people aren't drawing the connection between these two things. When you draw bad regulation, or you create regulation with unintended consequences, and yet have been warned all along that these are the consequences that'll come, at what point do we just start throwing up our hands about people writing regulation that has unexpected downstream consequences when they don't listen to the feedback that's given to them? Everybody's telling Ohio, don't do this. This is a terrible idea. Ohio's like, oh, we're going to head that direction anyway. What do we do?
And who else is telling Ohio don't do this is sex workers. And so I just actually, for our admins on this webcast, I just put a link in the chat from an article that just dropped today. There was just an op-ed published today by Domina Alexandra Snow, who's a 20-year veteran in the adult industry. She creates adult fetish and BDSM films. And that's her business. And she's really built quite the empire off of it. And so she's based in Ohio. She's a sex worker rights advocate and is really about community safety and bodily autonomy. And here, this is her perspective on what this bill is going to do here. It's like Ohioans will be hacked and swatted if this porn ID bill passes. And this is not to say, it's like, I think that these kinds of laws, the age verification law, the intention sounds good. Nobody wants minors accessing adult materials, especially people in the adult industry. And you know why? A, we don't want youth accessing our materials. That feels weird. We don't like that either. It's not age appropriate. And B, they're not paying customers. This is all about business. Minors are not going to be usually accessing credit cards to pay for the adult materials that performers have worked so hard to create. So nobody wants minors accessing adult materials online, but requiring adults to upload their government issued ID in order to access these materials, A, is ineffective, and B, it's really rather dangerous for the reasons outlined in this op-ed by Domina Snow. We're creating a database of people who also suffer from stigma. It's like, I mean, a lot of us access pornography, but very few of us are willing to admit that. And when you upload your ID, be it to a government database, like the DMV or something like that, or to a third party, we're now creating a database of people who are really vulnerable to blackmail. And we're starting to see documentation around hacks and attacks on these data banks because, I mean, that's a gold mine for people who want to extort others, right? So it's really dangerous, but it's also super ineffective. There's evidence to suggest that in places like Louisiana, where these age verification bills have already passed, that VPN sales are just like skyrocketing. And it makes you wonder if some of the lawmakers might have some sort of like backdoor deal with like VPN makers. So people are bypassing it. People aren't dumb, and kids aren't dumb. Kids can download a VPN. They can figure it out. And there's just so many more sensible upstream solutions like, hey, why not start in the home with the family and with parents? You know, parents can, install parental controls on their child's device. There are filters you can use. I mean, also we could be having, and we really ought to in this day and age, media literacy in schools, not just for pornography, which is definitely complex material that, youth should understand that pornography is not education, just like the Fast and the Furious is not driver's ed, right?
Oh, I love it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's the company sex ed, like if only so what these policies mean to me is they're not based in like sensible approaches to really trying to mitigate the problem that we're all concerned about. These laws are anti-sex and they're anti-porn, and they're trying to govern what we as adults can and can't do and view. And they're dangerous. They're just dangerous.
They are. And, you and I have had this conversation several times before. I particularly love this. So I used to be the cybersecurity editor at the Brookings Institution, and Savanah and I wrote an article together. I don't know if I can express to you all on this call how hard I fought to get the byline sex workers' rights advocate in there for Savanah in her bio. And it is the first time anybody's ever had that as their bio on Brookings for an article that we ended up writing together because we were talking about the impacts of end-to-end encryption. And end-to-end encryption issues are closely related to this because what we're seeing is that a misguided desire to protect kids, think of the children, continues to come up again and again as a political argument over why we shouldn't let kids have access to stuff. And in reality, it doesn't do anything other than fail completely to address the problem. It's really, and this was Savanah's line, it is a downstream treatment. It's a downstream symptom being treated as opposed to the upstream cause of the problem. Mm-hmm. And the approaches that Savanah's talking about, education, the actual working on community resources for children and families in education, social work resources, these are the kinds of things that actually solve the problem and build healthy families and healthy kids. This reminds me so much of the number of people who have come to me as we talk about Red Queen Dynamics and the product that many of you are using now, Red Queen, and why we do the attestation inside small businesses. Why do we have to ask somebody inside the business that, are you actually doing your cybersecurity training? Have you done all this stuff? Is any problems you've seen? You have to ask the person that because the issues that continue to come up are still something that can only be addressed at the source of the issue. You can't fix a problem with security outside a company. You can't solve a problem downstream of the actual issue by trying to automate it over time. And that's what it feels like these people are trying to do. They're trying to provide a technical solution to a social problem, and it's just not going to work, flatly.
Well, I feel like I can say this on this platform. I get skeptical as to whether it is really about solving the problem. I think people want to look like they're solving the problem, and they want to be tough on fighting exploitation, especially of minors. We all get uncomfortable and don't like the idea of minors accessing adult material, or certainly having their graphic images circulated online. Just to get back to the Brookings article, the problem that Sarah and I were uplifting there was the problem of it's like child sexual abuse material. And that could be anything from somebody taking media of a minor in a compromised sexual position, or, there's just sexual materials of a minor, which is illegal. Or it could be what's called self-generated child sexual abuse material, which is actually more common than you'd think. And that's because, you have phones now. And when you come of a certain age, you're going to take that phone and you're going to start taking pictures of yourself all over. And then you might be flirting with people, and you might be sending those pictures to somebody you have a crush on or a relationship with, or to a nefarious adult who's pretending to be your peer, or who's sort of like coaxing you into sending those materials. And then those materials are out there. That digital material, it can be circulated anywhere. And this is illegal material. It's also really quite embarrassing. And I would say, because of our super sex intolerant culture, the fact that like a naked image of a person is considered so deeply shameful, especially when you're a young person. This is all over the internet and you can't get it back. The mental health repercussions that can have on a young person are tremendous. And so we see people self-harming after these kinds of incidences. And it's really all about shame and extortion and guilt and exploitation. And so the solution that was proposed, or like, I think that article that Tarah and I wrote was about Apple, you may recall, kind of rolled out this idea. You know what we're going to do? We're going to go through everybody's phones, and we're just going to scan for child abuse material. We're just going to scan for it. We're going to use algorithms because that'll help solve the problem. And it's like, okay. I see the suggested intention, which is to find this abuse material and retract it from, digital circulation. That's not a bad thing, but the compromise there, what's on the chopping block, is all of our privacy, right? And so I can't help but wonder if this is sort of like a backdoor to just like ending encryption in general, like that must be a desire by some entities who are, really frustrated by end-to-end encryption and the privacy that we can have that way with our conversations and transmissions. But what it totally overlooks is the fact that algorithms aren't smart enough to catch CSAM material. I mean, what's to say they wouldn't be catching images of people who look young or look prepubescent, who happen to be doing perfectly consensual adult things. Then all of a sudden you have an investigation that's very invasive. And sometimes that might be the cost of trying to recover this abusive material. But we really got to be looking upstream. We got to be looking at the moment when a kid takes their phone and starts taking naked pictures of themselves. And we got to look at the fact that people are abusing minors, usually in the home, like sex trafficking, exploitation. Like, the abuser is usually somebody close to the young person. This isn't stranger danger. And so that's where we need to be looking to organizations like Freedom Network USA and other anti-trafficking organizations that have a rights-based approach to ending exploitation and looking at family circumstances. What is the cause of abuse? And addressing that. And then with young people and their phones, it's like they need classes being like, this is a powerful tool. And once you take a picture and send it somewhere, you lose control over it. And like that should be included in sex education, frankly. Freedom Network USA, this group is amazing. They address trafficking across all labor sectors and sex trafficking. And what we really like about them is that they have sensible education-based approaches. They're all about immigration reform, access to reproductive rights in healthcare, and also I'm really proud to say the decriminalization of sex work. They're one of the rare anti-trafficking organizations that is bravely aligning with sex workers in the sex trade, seeing sex workers as essential partners in addressing exploitation in the sex trade. And that's one reason I wanted to uplift that op-ed written by Domina Alexander Snow. And Tarah, thank you so much for having me on, because sex workers swim in the waters with the sharks. We know what the dangers are in the sex trade. But then there's society saying, we got to catch the sharks, and they're casting big nets. Like, we're going to end-to-end encryption, and we're going to make everybody upload their IDs, and we're going to criminalize the shit out of everything. And they're not really catching sharks. The sharks chomp through those nets. The Jeffrey Epstein certainly chomped through that net. But you know what they're catching is dolphins, beautiful, sexy, sentient beings who are dolphins. The metaphor here is the dolphins are the sex workers, and we're getting hurt with all these bad policies, and you're all going to get hurt too, because what affects us will eventually affect you, and we're just canaries in the coal mine.
This is like, with all due respect to, like, you know, Weld Pond and Bruce Schneier and James Byerly and some of the great guests we've had on before, this is the greatest conversation I've had. So beautiful, sexy dolphins. This is so key. You know, when I think about this, one of the problems we continue to have is that people keep trying to solve these problems downstream by treating the symptoms instead of upstream where the cause is. And I'm looking, this is such a great question here. Nick Sander on LinkedIn asks, how much of this depends on policymakers' lack of knowledge regarding the topic and what helps? I think I would initially say the reason that Savanah keeps talking about public health, and the reason that we in cybersecurity keep talking about the beginnings of this as a public health issue. Adam Shostak has a lot of great work on cybersecurity as a public health issue. Our wonderful head of product, Tilda Lohengrim, describes what we're doing in compliance as treating the upstream cause of downstream security problems in small businesses. It's like public health. And so I think one of the challenges I see policymakers really struggle with is treating the symptom as sexy. Treating the upstream cause is expensive.
Yeah.
It's often something that doesn't show up in the numbers for years or has complex origins for resolution of a problem. And as a result, it's real difficult to plant a flag and a leg on a burning fire truck and say, I'm here to solve the problem, and make that work in terms of politics. I'm just curious.
I want to get to Nick's question because that's a great question, Nick.
Yeah.
So it's like, I think you're exactly right, Tara. It's like the BandAid solutions that are usually largely ineffective and that compromise our rights and privacy are sexy solutions. And they have catch lines like, we're going to stop this, or we're going to do this, or we're going to fight this. It's always very combative, you know, but really it's like, you want to end sex trafficking, immigration reform, housing first models, discrimination protections for LGBTQ people so that young queer people aren't being kicked out of their homes and forced to live on the streets and survive. Those are big, fundamental things we need to work on as a society if we really care about all members of our society. But like housing first, for whatever reason, that's terribly controversial because it's so expensive to build all these like micro apartments. And then there's also a lot of stigma. It's like, shouldn't these people pull themselves up from their bootstraps? You know, and then we get things like down the road, just like lots of like housing sweeps in different cities and just like pushing unhoused people around. And it's expensive. If you added up all the money that's been spent sweeping people around and talking about the problem, you could have gone back to the 70s, built a bunch of apartment buildings. You'd probably have way less of an unhoused problem now. And things like exploitation, be it in person or, you know, technological, have similar solutions that people just can't really commit to in a major way. But that's what we really have to do. These Band-Aid solutions are ineffective and harmful. But then getting back to Nick's question, Nick was asking how much of these policies, these bad policies, are due to lawmakers not really understanding the issue and what helps in this scenario. That's a great question. I used to work for the ACLU in Washington, and I was a coalition organizer for what we called the Tech Equity Coalition. And that was led by the brilliant Jennifer Lee. Shout out if Jennifer Lee ever sees this. It was amazing to work with her. But we were up against, that was really a David and Goliath kind of coalition. We were the Davids, and the Goliath were big tech companies like Microsoft. And we were trying to pass the People's Privacy Act of Washington because we wanted to give Washingtonians basic data privacy, you know, about how their data is collected, stored, and circulated, and how they can opt in or opt out of that data collection. So we wanted to pass the People's Privacy Act, but then we were also up against facial recognition and really weak data privacy laws that these big corporations were putting forth instead of our privacy bill. And we were not able to pass the People's Privacy Act, but we made a good case. But what we were able to do was defend against these really low bar data privacy bills put forth by corporations. And all of this took a lot of education. The way we did it was we formed a grassroots coalition, or maybe I guess we'd call it a grassroots coalition. So it was leaders from a lot of different communities who were all affected by lack of data privacy, but in different ways. So we had leaders from domestic violence prevention groups talking about the issue of stalking and the importance of data privacy. We had multiple representatives from different migrant communities talking about how data privacy was so important for people because they might be being harassed for xenophobia, or there's undocumented communities that might be being surveilled by CBP. We had students and parents talking about data collection in schools, and all these different interest groups were able to all set meetings with their lawmakers and talk about the issue from a different angle. And then we would compile all those perspectives into short, hard-hitting one-pagers, being like, here are all the different ways that this weak data privacy policy is going to affect all Washingtonians. And that was the kind of accessible, like day in the life, how this pans out, information that lawmakers needed to understand this issue, which is really rather complex. A lot of lawmakers are not experts in all the things they need to weigh in on. So that was how we went about it. And it really just takes grinding it out and calling your lawmakers, setting up a meeting and giving them these perspectives. And the more perspectives, the better.
I strongly agree with it. And I love the idea that you can have that conversation with your lawmakers. It's much more accessible than most people think. Jason Slagle and I, a couple of weeks ago, had this conversation. And Jason, of course, is a very famous and incredible person in the MSP community and an advocate. And, you know, he directly works with policymakers, the JCDC. And I think one of the challenges we face in cybersecurity, as well as in the sex work trade, the sex trade and hacking share often the fact that we're on the front lines of determining and discovering bad or terrible or terrifying behavior. And yet often the act of reporting that behavior makes us as much of a target as the people actually committing the crimes. And I fear that regulation that criminalizes behavior that is fundamentally about being victimized causes this problem to begin with. So I think with policymakers, when it comes to that, we have to look at what the nature of the actual issue is and ensure that the penalties are really only being faced by the people who are actively victimizing other people. It's a really tough challenge. And I think right now about, you know, MSPs that discover, like we all know in this conversation, you know, we've all been part of that business where somebody's discovered something on a client box, and it's indicative of the fact that an employee is misappropriating some company's resources and running something illegal, or they're storing CSAM, they're storing seriously problematic material. The act of preserving that evidence in order to go to law enforcement, it's at the discretion of the local prosecutor whether you are as guilty as the person who did it in the moment that you're trying to ensure that you can do this kind of reporting. And it makes reporting these crimes much more problematic. It's not just that you get victimized again and penalized by it. Sometimes the act of attempting to be a safeguard against it is considered to be the crime itself. I'm curious if you've got a take on this one too, and if you've seen some similar situations, just the act of reporting that kind of violence. Yeah.
I mean, so many. I mean, just like, I mean, down to the in-person, like if we're just taking sex work as an example, I know so many sex workers and clients who have experienced or seen violent crimes and been unable to report crimes against themselves or crimes that they have witnessed because they're afraid of getting arrested for breaking the law for prostitution. That's in the tangible world. Online, the two examples that come to mind are these age verification bills that we were just talking about. Like, so if I'm in Louisiana and I have to upload my ID to look at videos on Pornhub, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to do that. You know what I'm going to do instead is I'm going to go elsewhere to more unregulated spaces where I'm much more likely to be viewing porn that is far less ethical than on a more public, more above board adult industry website, you know, that is doing what it can to improve its filtering system, to improve the ethics of all the videos that people are uploading there. So that is an example of these policies actually creating deeper black markets where more problematic materials are likely to not just be like made available, but consumed. So it's encouraging that behavior. But then also I gotta shout out SESTA and FOSTA. For those of you who don't know, SESTA and FOSTA stands for the Stop Enabling Sex Trafficking Act and the Fight Online Sex Trafficking Act. I mean, see how they're all like, we're going to stop, we're going to fight, you know? And it's like, and the problem that those bills asserted to address was the issue of sex trafficking online, especially on adult industry escort advertising websites. So things like Backpage when it existed, or the Craigslist adult listings when those existed. So SESTA FOSTA, I think it passed in 2016. I always get mixed up. Might have been 2018. But essentially what these bills did is they're federal, and they made website platforms legally liable for any content that was posted to their website that could be connected to sex trafficking. It was very broadly worded. And so this means if you're a Facebook or if you're a Reddit or something like that, there's so many confirmations. There's user-generated content going up on your websites constantly, you know? And so what it did is on those big platforms that have those resources, is they just started censoring left and right. And we're seeing all sorts of people being booted from these platforms because they're saying things that could be misconstrued as trying to set up a prostitution meet. But what also happened, and this is where the real harm comes in, is dozens of escorting advertising websites heard that this passed and they shuttered overnight. They didn't have the resources. They weren't going to take the risk. And obviously they were commercial sex sites, you know, like, and regardless of whether actual trafficking was occurring on this site, the phrasing was so broad that it was all commercial sex activity, essentially, regardless of whether there was trafficking or not. And so what happened is we lost all of these online classified spaces where people were peddling their services, and it hamstrung law enforcement and private detectives from using their number one tool for identifying, locating, and making contact with missing people, people who might be engaged in, sex trafficking scenarios, or minors who might have run away from home and were trying to make ends meet on these websites, which is not the right place for them to be, right? So this bill intended to hypothetically stop sex trafficking, probably ended up making it much harder for law enforcement to actually recover people experiencing potential exploitation. It also further endangered sex workers who are in a precarious position anyways, because all of a sudden, thousands of sex workers did not have a safe place to advertise online. And if you can't advertise your services online, that doesn't mean that you just like hang up your hat and go get a job at McDonald's. No, you're displaced. So you go on to modeling websites or dating websites or different places. And those are dangerous scenarios because expectations are mixed. Somebody thinks that they're having a date with you and you kind of expect money, and violence can occur. And then we saw strip clubs get flooded with different kinds of sex workers, which imbalanced those work environments. And then, people went into bars, they go into the streets, they go into hotel lobbies. Sex work doesn't stop. It just makes sex workers much more endangered and unstable in the way that they can conduct their already risky business. So SESTA FOSTA, a great example. I just want to throw those examples out there of like policies that cause more harm than good, right?
Absolutely. And when I see policies that cause more harm than good, I also sometimes see economic ways of moderating or mediating that harm. And for me, I'm thinking about cyber insurance. When I think about the equivalent of this in the MSP and MSSP world, I'm thinking about the way that small businesses unable to keep up with competing regulations are being required now to get cyber insurance to handle anything that happens on their watch. And yet at the same time, if they're unable to comply with the relevant regulations, if they just don't have the capacity or bandwidth, we're talking 35-person trucking companies in the Midwest trying to abide by data privacy laws and understand them all internally. That's ridiculous. So you'll see situations where small businesses can't get into the supply chain until they have a cyber insurance policy or they've gone through vendor assessments. And they'll try to get cyber insurance, but can't manage to do it. It's as if they can't manage to buy the relevant economic protection for their ongoing activities, which continues to get riskier as the regulatory landscape gets more patchy and complex.
Yeah.
And so when I think about how we simplify and start to solve this problem, I think about the fact that common sense is so rarely involved in any of these transactions. Just the sheer act of anybody explaining to somebody what CESA and FOSTA would have done. And believe me, I tried, you tried, we all tried. Everybody in the cybersecurity industry instantaneously understood the impacts of these two laws just as much as the sex work community did. And so when I think about having these conversations, and especially I love Nick's the question about policymakers, I feel like we've got to walk back a little bit and just offer some common sense solutions, such as somebody trying to report a crime who is very clearly not guilty of that crime shouldn't be held liable for trying to report it. I mean, we may have a connected crime, but this process of trying to criminalize someone to force their participation in a process of law enforcement sounds an awful lot like Alf V twisting the arms of a Viking executive to try to get them to turn over more information as a result of having gotten a foothold. Mm-hmm. At no part of this process should we be looking at a coercive environment when somebody hasn't done this thing wrong. That's the problem I think I continue to have. And I'm disturbed by it. I think for those, I'm not going to go too deep into this one because, as somebody who comes out of the information security community and serves IT and managed service providers in this country, I come from a perspective where I'm building a tool that interlocutes between cyber insurance and small businesses. And so I want to be cautious as I say this, but when I think about building respectful tools, when I think about creating relationships with people, I don't think about trying to coerce them into anything. Any part of a relationship that is coercive is abhorrent. Mm-hmm. And yet it just seems like we keep bumping into these coercive relationships again and again that have no, that would fall apart the second that regulatory power collapsed behind it. And that's really disturbing to me. It's misshapen. It angers me. I'm vexed. I'm very vexed.
I just am. She is vexed.
I am. I'm angry and frustrated. Oh. And great. Thanks for that, Mr. Savanah. Here's the issue. The challenge I think we keep having is that at its base, if any of these relationships are coercive, including the ones we are deliberately setting up by creating problematic cyber insurance and cybersecurity regulation for small businesses, by creating problematic age verification laws, you're setting up a coercive platform. You're creating crown jewels for horrible people.
Yeah.
Because at the moment at which you start requiring age verification for underage people, you are creating a data pile at every company. And I promise you that if you manage to compromise just one of the companies that stores a reasonably decent storehouse of underage information and their IDs, like, well, what have you even done at that point? How is the harm not devastatingly worse than anything you were trying to prevent?
Something we also haven't talked about, how it's like the ability to navigate these ever-changing and complex policy landscapes is really only something that very deeply resourced organizations and companies can do. Another job that I had prior to the ACLU was I worked for a cannabis startup in Washington State, and we were a tier 2 manufacturer. And so there was all these different rules and regulations that we had to really swiftly learn how to adhere to. And this was while we were fundraising to get off the ground. We had more access to resources than a lot of people did, but we weren't like the really big dogs, if you know what I mean. And just trying to stay compliant, just trying to stay legal was so expensive and hard, having to have a whole legal team just to help you understand what to expect that week, because you could set up your whole manufacturing facility and all your SOPs to adhere with the laws today, and then they change tomorrow or they change next week, and you have to radically change things, and it's just not viable for businesses to compete in that kind of environment. And I was with like a mid-level company. Like, we had access to assets, we didn't have all the money in the world, we weren't a giant corporation. But then I'm thinking about all the smaller businesses, the mom and pop businesses, which were people who actually smoked weed, came from the black market, might have been impacted by the carceral system, and definitely deserved a slice of the pie of the legal cannabis industry. And they get squeezed out left and right across states that legalize pot, because the regulations are so paranoid and uptight, and it's very much about fear of people accessing cannabis in the wrong way. And it's just like, talk to your kids about cannabis, you know, like keep your alcohol, your cigarettes, and your cannabis and your goddamn gun in a vault. Keep it away from your kids, you know, like there's like the conversations around parenting are really lacking. And instead, the people who suffer are the mom and pops who can't do business. So I really appreciate what your company's doing, Tarah, to make like regulatory, like, you know, compliance technologically accessible to, especially like I work for a very small nonprofit, and we are really appreciating using your software because it helps us understand where our vulnerabilities are and what we can do about it. And it's not breaking the bank. We're not having to hire a whole legal team. And it also gives us time to gradually adjust our practices. It's not overwhelming. And I think that this is like a sensible approach that's holistic and would make sense across the board where we're seeing onerous, you know, regulations that are preventing competition, fair competition in the market, frankly.
I can see that. I think I'm so glad that you have this kind thing to say. I'm thinking about something James Byron, which is that the challenge with new regulation coming along is instantly providing documentation on 100% compliance of that new regulation is just as burdensome as everything that came before it. And with our setup, what you get to do is you get to demonstrate all of your previous compliance plus whatever little new slice you need to fix. And that's instantaneous. He said once, you know, this is the difference between being back online in retail terms between a week and 6 months. Right. And I'm gratified to see that, because what we try to do is be respectful of people. And there's this overarching class of problems that I'm interested in. I'm a social science nerd. And this overarching class of problems I'm interested in is, if you think this is your problem, that's not your problem. There's actually a different problem that you haven't fully acknowledged. And when I think about things like compliance and needing to stay up with a patchy landscape of regulation, no matter what industry you're in, I mean, by definition, fundamentally, almost every single sex worker is an entrepreneur or a member of a small business or an employee of a small business. When I think about it this way, I think to myself, the burden that's placed on people to know things outside their field, it's like it erases all the benefits of being in a society, of operating under a social contract, where I don't have to know tax regulations. My accountant does. And they have to communicate as much to me as is necessary for me to understand the impacts of my decisions. But I am not going to be memorizing irs.gov. I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to know the law code. I know some of the relevant ones. And like somebody maybe who's dealt with a chronic condition, I might know more about one very specific thing than basically all lawyers, but I'm not a lawyer. And so I think I want to be specialized in what I'm specialized in. And what I think we specialize in is finding a way to respectfully give people the information they need to make good decisions and track that they've made those good decisions and the impacts positive over time of having done so. I'm glad about it. And I'm really glad that you find the use in it. So just in case everybody didn't hear that, she just told you to do something, people.
Well, another thing I appreciate also that you introduced this tool to us at such an early stage, you know, and asked for our input as sex workers to test it out, because we have different privacy goggles on. We see the world through a slightly different lens. And so getting to try on these tools and see how they adhere to our own privacy practices, where are our vulnerabilities? It's been frankly fascinating to sort of assess sex worker privacy practice, especially at like a nonprofit organization, compared to this this handy software that will help you understand what are the actual regulations, the ones coming down the pipeline, where are you in your, adherence to all these policies. It's been a really great experience, and I appreciate you appreciating our expertise in this area in our own grassrootsy way.
I'm really grateful for that. It's kind of funny. Yes, every small business in this country does have to abide by NIST CSF. I mean, like they should and will find themselves being forced to very quickly as they enter supply chains. And so it's fascinating that, that legal businesses like sex work, like cannabis, are having to abide by these cybersecurity frameworks that were not designed for them. So the process of talking to you and to your team has been one where we made some very different UX choices than we might have. And the interesting thing is that the UX choices that we made as a result of the early conversations with you and your team have resulted in accountants, lawyers, VCSOs, MSPs, MSSPs, all saying this is a respectfully designed product that Janice in accounting at a small business that we serve is going to be able to use. right?
Also,
That has made it work.
Yeah, it's not just privacy, but it's also consent and emotional intelligence, and like bringing that human experience into this incredibly inhuman process of trying to analyze like where are our technological and privacy practices as far as these like national standards, you know? So I'm glad that we could add a little warmth to the issue, a little more human touch that was already there, you know? But yeah, I feel like has been a really good collaboration so far, and we're really just thankful to be included.
I am so glad. And so, you know, as we're starting to wrap up a little bit on this, I see what does this go? Oh, I love a comment that Ian behind the scenes has for us right now. It is the canary in the coal mine analogy, and I absolutely love this. The miners who used to use canaries didn't just let a canary die. They built a little canary resuscitator because they understood that the canary mattered so much to them. Isn't that the most priceless? Go ahead.
Ian, that really just warms my heart. Society, so sex workers are being we're your canaries in the coal mine right now. Please build us a resuscitator. We'll give you so much valuable life-saving data, but like, don't let us die down there, okay? Build us one, please. That's amazing. I gotta save this link. Everybody's gonna want to see.
Oh, it's great. That's so great. I love it. So anybody who's got any last minute questions, please pop on in here, and ask your last questions, folks. But Savanah, is there anything that we didn't cover today that you would like to? And in so doing, would you please tell us about any place that you would like people to go to, support, or pay attention to? Anything you want to call their attention to?
Oh man, well, we covered a lot of ground today, Tara, as we always do. Love chatting with you. And it's been a pleasure to be here and to talk with you all. And just to recap, I'm the founder and co-director of New Moon Network. Yep, thank you so much. So what our goal is to resource the movement for sex workers' rights. We are focused here in the US. And check this out. We have documented 1,000% growth in the movement for sex workers' rights since 2015. Back in 2015, I was working on a national board, and we were able to count about 20 sex worker-led organizations in the US. Maybe there was 30, maybe we didn't catch them all. But now at New Moon, we have a growing list of sex worker-led organizations in the US, and there's 230 and growing every day. We think that at least 170 of them have been active in the past year. And what that 1,000% growth indicates is that all these problems we talked about today, all the surveillance, the censorship, the increasing criminalization that is coming for you all, we're the canaries. The canaries are coming out of the woodwork, and they're mobilizing, and a deeply stigmatized population, which is sex workers, are making themselves visible so that they can talk to you all about these important issues. And sex worker rights funding receives less than 1% of all foundation human rights funding globally. We at New Moon are trying to do our small part to change that. And so we offer small grants to sex worker-led organizations between $1,000 and $5,000. And we've brokered over $1 million into the movement since we started a year and a half ago. And so if you would like to contribute to this good cause, you can go to our website, newmoonnetwork.org, and you can sign up for a newsletter or contribute. And thank you all for listening so much.
Absolutely. Savanah, it's been a complete and total joy having you with us today. And so I get to ask you the last question that I always ask everybody, and it's really, really fun. I've gotten some great answers, astronauts, spaceship captain, the sort of the same thing, but not exactly the same thing, not once you've seen Janeway do it. Just awesome answers to this question before. So you don't have to come up with something awesome, just truthful and joy-filled. If you didn't do this for a living, if in an alternate universe, whether it's a hobby or a calling you didn't pursue, what is alternate universe Savanah doing for a living, for career, for a life? What's the job that you would have instead of this one?
Oh, for a living career? I don't know. I think I'd be a physical therapist if I wasn't a dominatrix, sex worker, professional, sexy person in general, or running this organization. I'm of the body. I love the body. I want the body to feel good. But if I didn't have to make money, it'd be rock and roll, baby. I'd be out there touring all the time. I'd have a rock band as I have.
You're a singer.
And if this whole nonprofit thing doesn't work out, I'm hanging up my hat and I'm going to get back on the road with an electric guitar and tour the country. And I'll be at a roadhouse near you and just working out. So, yep.
I love it. I love every part of that. All right, my friend, this was absolutely wonderful. Savanah Sly, everybody, please feel free to reach out to her. And as for this week, folks, I am honored and joy-filled, as always, to tell you that we're going to have a great lineup for you as we move along over the next couple of weeks. Looking forward to making those announcements soon. So, folks, thank you for coming to this week's Cybersecurity Office Hours. Thanks for your wonderful questions. As always, have a great week, folks. See you next time.